What would you do if the simply dressed woman standing next to you in the showroom was actually the one who built the company itself? No one knew who she was. No one bothered to ask her name. The manager sighed with annoyance. The receptionist bluntly asked her to leave for not dressing in line with the brand. And then, a security camera caught her gaze. No outrage, no resentment, just a strangely calm look, as if she had seen this far too many times in her life. The truth is, she was the one who originally wrote the company's first code of conduct for the entire retail system. She didn't speak up. She didn't argue. But 3 days later, the entire regional leadership team was summoned. 2 weeks later, a mysterious plaque was installed at headquarters, engraved with 27 names that had once been erased. This story isn't about power. It's about intentional forgetting and how a system was finally forced to confront the part of its legacy it tried to bury. Are you ready to hear the story of the woman the company once pretended never existed and the quiet return that made everyone bow their heads? 12:57 p.m. Scottsdale, Arizona. The temperature hit 101 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sun poured down on the glass facade of Orion Prestige Motors like it was trying to set the entire sky ablaze. Outside, a black woman stepped out of an old Toyota Camry. She wore a crisp white shirt, light-washed jeans, and simple white sneakers. No luxury car, no bodyguards, no media entourage. Just an ordinary woman, or at least that's all anyone would think by looking at her. What they didn't know was that this woman was Gabrielle Hawkins, the CEO of Orion Prestige Group, a multi-billion-dollar corporation that owned over 80 luxury car showrooms across the United States, including the very one she was about to enter, the Scottsdale, Arizona branch, a showroom implicated in more than 58 racial discrimination complaints within the last 18 months alone. Gabrielle didn't enter like an executive. There was no introduction, no name tag. She walked in like an average customer, or more precisely, a test. No one in that elegant lounge, with its gleaming marble floors, imported oak-paneled walls, and soft amber lights cascading down the chassis of a 2024 ArcLight Phantom, had any idea that this afternoon would mark a turning point in the company's history. Gabrielle opened the massive glass door and stepped into the cool, climate-controlled air. Her footsteps echoed gently on the marble, yet none of the staff looked up. A white couple had just entered from the west entrance and were immediately greeted with warm enthusiasm by a blonde woman in a fitted beige silk suit, Chloe Sparks. She smiled and stepped quickly to open the door, her voice sweet. "Welcome back, Mr. Evans. We've been expecting you." Gabrielle's gaze drifted left, where the ArcLight Phantom sat under a spotlight. The car's obsidian black paint shimmered with a hint of deep violet under the lights. $495,000. Base price, before customization. She walked closer and gently placed her palm on the hood. The surface was cold, smooth, spotless. She didn't speak, just observed, like any true car enthusiast would. At the far corner, a young male employee, Kyle Danner, looked up from his screen, scanned her from head to toe, raised an eyebrow, then looked back down. Chloe had already escorted the couple into the VIP suite, offering drinks and launching into a pitch about the Platinum Executive Package. Still, no one approached Gabrielle. She turned slightly, searching for any eye contact, but all she met was a curated indifference, something heavier than rejection, the deliberate act of being ignored. A man's voice rang out, sharp and controlling. "Ma'am, we ask that visitors not lean on the vehicles unless they are serious buyers." A white man in his late 40s, dressed in a dark tailored suit, red tie, and polished leather shoes, approached. He was Lance Merritt, the sales manager, described in multiple complaints as the one who sizes up customers by their shoes and nothing else. Gabrielle remained calm. "I'm interested in the Phantom. Just wanted to get a feel of the design." Lance didn't respond with hospitality, but with a smirk. "You do understand that this model starts at $500,000, correct?" She nodded lightly. "Yes, I do." Kyle, from his desk a few steps away, spoke up loud enough for the whole showroom to hear. "She probably just walked here. Looks like she's returning something to Target." A few snickers followed. Gabrielle turned toward the reception desk where a young Latina woman, visibly tense, was arranging catalogs. Her name was Layla Torres, a final-year service management intern, barely a month into the job. Their eyes met for a split second. Gabriel gave her a subtle nod, as if to say, "I see you," but Layla only froze for a breath, then looked down. Lance checked his watch, then looked at Gabriel again. "Unless you're here to actually purchase, I'm going to have to ask you not to distract our staff." Gabrielle didn't respond. She simply pulled out her phone, opened an app, and whispered, "Tanya, begin logging the entire system." On the other end, Tanya, her executive assistant, replied with a quiet tap. "Already live. Internal logs recording." Kyle stood from his desk, moving closer. "So, what's the plan? You financing this? Or just snapping pics for social?" Gabriel remained composed. "I'd like to know about the customization options on the Phantom. Is there someone who can assist?" Chloe Sparks, walking past after sending the couple into the VIP room, threw a mocking remark under her breath. "Try the brochure rack." Or better yet, CarMax. Layla stood up, not loudly but clearly. "I can help you, ma'am." Lance whipped around. "Step back. You're not authorized to handle Tier 1 prospects. Focus on shadowing." Layla took a step back, but her eyes stayed fixed on Gabriel, who was now no longer just a stranger. Kyle sat back down and turned to Chloe. "We should put up a sign. No entry in sneakers over $50. Chloe burst out laughing. Gabriel gently tapped her phone. "Tanya, alert Paul, we may need to initiate escalated presence." Tanya replied simply, "Understood." Gabriel turned to Lance. "I'm giving you a chance. One last chance to do the right thing." Lance scoffed. "Lady, you're not fooling anyone. Go home. This is Scottsdale, not Craigslist." Gabrielle didn't answer, but in her gaze, cold as steel, something was already shifting. A black man in a light gray t-shirt, salt and pepper hair, a customer, stepped beside her. "She has every right to be here. She's asking about a car." Gabrielle looked at him, nodded softly, and for the first time since stepping inside, she smiled. Only those who've been judged by appearance know how to spot it in others. A look, an attitude, the silent theft of dignity. But what none of them realized was that the woman they were trying to escort out the front door was the very person who held the keys to the entire system from the back. And that afternoon, inside a high-end showroom in the heart of Arizona, they didn't just turn away a customer, they turned away a revolution. 14 minutes after stepping through the glass door, Gabriel Hawkins was still standing alone amid the gleaming lights of Orion Prestige Motors in Scottsdale. Alone among cars worth millions, alone among glances that slid right past her. The ambient conversations, the laughter mixed with soft jazz playing from ceiling speakers, it all felt like a symphony carefully orchestrated to leave her out of the melody. Lance Merritt, the arrogant manager with the blazing red tie, had returned to the control desk after dropping his warning not to waste the staff's time. Chloe Sparks was still chatting animatedly with the white couple in the VIP area, laughing loudly and using the phrase, "exclusive treatment," with every sales pitch. Kyle Danner sat behind a computer screen, hand moving the mouse while his eyes occasionally flicked toward Gabriel, as if keeping an eye on a potential threat. And Layla Torres, the young intern, had gone back to the catalog counter, occasionally glancing over, quietly. No one asked Gabrielle what she needed. No one offered assistance. No one even extended the courtesy of a standard greeting, like they would to any other customer. She stood there in the center of the showroom, in her pressed white shirt and clean Levi's jeans, as if she didn't exist in the glossy reality around her. And that was the most chilling truth. She was being treated as if she simply wasn't there. Gabrielle didn't leave. She walked slowly toward a nearby display stand, where a spec sheet for the ArcLight Phantom rested under glass. She leaned in, reading the specs. A 6.75-liter V12 engine, 0 to 60 in 4.9 seconds. She knew those numbers by heart. She had personally approved the redesign of that engine just a year ago. But here she was, reading them again as if she were just another curious newcomer to the brand. Just then, a sharp female voice came from behind. "Ma'am, unless you're actually buying, we prefer guests not to lean on our display cases." Gabrielle turned. Chloe Sparks stood there, arms crossed, eyes scanning Gabrielle from head to toe. Her voice remained sugary, but laced with suspicion. Gabrielle nodded gently. I was just reading the specifications. I'm interested in how the transmission handles under torque. Chloe smirked. We usually reserve those discussions for clients with appointments. Do you have one? No, Gabrielle replied evenly. Chloe looked pleased. Then I suggest visiting our website. All the information is online. Without waiting for a reply, she turned away like gliding past a smudge on the marble floor. Kyle, from behind his screen, called out just loud enough. Should we start charging for brochure time? Maybe install a coin slot. A small laugh came from somewhere inside. Unclear who. Gabrielle turned to look at Layla. This time their eyes locked longer. The young woman gave the slightest nod. Not enough to count as defiance, but just enough to say, I see what's happening, and maybe I'm learning from it. Gabrielle moved to another section, where a customized version of the Orion Spectra SUV was on display, a new release tailored for the North American market. She quietly touched the steering wheel, the Italian leather she had personally approved from a luxury vendor. She didn't need to ask, but she still did, directing her voice toward Kyle. Is the Spectra using the new adaptive suspension system yet? Kyle didn't turn, eyes still on the screen. Ma'am, we don't do tech briefings without appointments, especially not for browsers. Lance stepped out again, this time with a coffee cup in hand. He looked at Gabrielle and smirked. Still here? Gabrielle held his gaze. I'm waiting for someone to answer a technical question. Lance chuckled. This is a luxury showroom, not a seminar. People come here to buy, not to play trivia. Then he tilted his head. Unless you're lost? Gabrielle tilted hers back, voice calm. I know exactly where I am. Do you? The air thickened. A few customers began to notice. An older woman in a gray suit whispered to her companion from a distance, She's being treated like she doesn't even exist. Gabrielle took out her phone and whispered, Tanya, are we still recording everything? The voice on the other end came back. Every word, every response, facial expressions too. Good, she said, nearly inaudible. Lance turned and walked off, muttering as he did, Give her 5 more minutes, then ask security to clear the floor. Kyle nodded. Noted. Chloe watched Gabrielle from the reception desk, her eyes no longer purely disdainful, but wary. She was starting to sense something didn't add up. Gabrielle walked directly to the catalog counter and stood in front of Layla. No smile, no pleasantries. Just one sentence. Do you believe this is how customers should be treated? Layla bit her lip. Her hand paused atop a stack of papers. She took a deep breath and replied, voice low but clear. No, ma'am, I don't. Gabrielle nodded. No praise, no blame. Just, that matters. Kyle now stood and walked toward them. Everything okay here? Gabrielle met his eyes. Just asking a question, or is that not allowed either? Kyle crossed his arms. Depends who's asking. Lance emerged again from the conference room. He positioned himself in the center and cleared his throat. Let's not escalate things. If you're not here to buy, it's best you head out before it becomes awkward. Gabrielle asked one last time. So customers who don't fit a certain look are just pushed aside here? Lance didn't flinch. Not at all. But this is a high-value environment. We simply prioritize serious prospects. And how do you define serious? Gabrielle's voice dropped an octave. Chloe answered from nearby. Bank statements help. Kyle burst out laughing. Chloe ducked back inside. Lance shrugged. Look, let's not turn this into a thing. Gabrielle stood still, silent. But this time someone else spoke. Layla. Sir, she asked a valid question about the suspension system. That makes her a customer. The space seemed to pause. Chloe peeked out from inside, eyebrows raised. Kyle muttered, The intern's getting brave. Lance stared at Layla. 3 weeks in and already challenging management? Layla responded, voice slightly trembling but unwavering. 3 weeks in, and I've seen this happen before. Gabrielle nodded slowly, eyes still on Layla. The air was dense, but what was about to happen would weigh even more. Gabrielle placed her hand on the catalog counter, lifted her head, and stared directly into the faces of every employee. No smile, no fury, just a cold steadiness, and the sense that everything was about to shift. And right at that moment, at minute 29 since she walked in, the internal surveillance system triggered its first encrypted alert to the New York headquarters, a protocol only activated during critical discrimination events. A showroom that had seemed to run smoothly was now about to be investigated down to its bones. And the woman they thought didn't meet the standards to touch the cars was about to decide the future of every person in that room. The moment Layla Torres said that makes her a customer, it wasn't just an impulsive reaction. It was the first crack in the wall of silence. A showroom long accustomed to operating through glances and unspoken bias was beginning to fracture. Not because someone shouted, not because of a commotion, but because a young woman barely a month into her internship dared to stand with someone being dismissed, right in front of her superiors. Lance Merritt froze. His eyes moved slowly, as if recalibrating the situation in the odd quiet that followed. Chloe Sparks glanced from the VIP counter, her hand holding a glass of lemonade, frowning slightly. Kyle Danner, behind his desk, lifted his head, fully for the first time in over 30 minutes. And for once, there was no sarcasm in his expression. And in that room, what was shifting wasn't just the atmosphere. It was the direction of everyone's gaze. A man in a navy polo shirt, short hair, holding a phone near the front door, began recording. He didn't say a word, just quietly lifted his phone and aimed it toward Gabrielle and the employees facing her. His name was Ben Kessler, founder of an AI startup, a regular at this showroom, and someone who often recorded unusual interactions to study human behavior. But this time, he wasn't recording to learn. He was recording to expose. Discrimination. Scottsdale. Orion Motors. That was the caption he typed as he hit post on Reddit. In less than 10 seconds, the post had 12 upvotes. Within the next 5 minutes, it would become the top trending thread in Arizona. Lance turned toward Ben, lowering his voice. "Sir, we don't allow filming inside the showroom." Ben didn't lower his phone. "Then maybe treat people like they belong here." Gabrielle didn't look at Ben. She remained face to face with Lance, her eyes calm but unyielding. Chloe stepped closer, the polite smile on her face beginning to fade. "Ma'am," she said, voice tight but controlled, "I believe you've been standing here long enough. If you're not planning to test drive or purchase, we'd ask you to make space for other clients." Gabrielle replied, "I asked for information about the Phantom 3 times. Kyle interjected and got 3 polite suggestions to try somewhere else. Seems fair." Ben's voice cut in clearly for the first time. "That's not fair. That's profiling." A woman sitting near the reception desk, wearing a beige blazer and round glasses, turned to her companion. "She's just asking. Why are they acting like she's stealing?" Layla remained still, not retracting her words. Her hand tightened around the pen she held, lips pressed into a line. Gabrielle turned slightly toward Kyle. "Can you tell me the base price of the Phantom, Mr. Danner?" Kyle answered, hesitating for a second. "Base price is irrelevant if you're not qualified." "And what qualifies a customer here?" Gabrielle asked, still calmly. Chloe cut in, "Typically, net worth, or at least some shoes that don't look like they came from a gym locker." A few small laughs escaped, but this time, the laughter didn't carry through the room. It was swallowed by shifting glances. An older black man near the side entrance, the same one who had spoken up earlier, shook his head. "This ain't right," he said slowly and clearly. "She's asking questions. They treating her like she broke in." Ben turned the camera toward the man and whispered, "You mind if I keep this rolling?" The man nodded. "Let him see." Gabrielle pulled out her phone, dialed. A woman's voice answered. "Tanya," Gabrielle said, "activate full escalation protocol. Alert regional oversight." Tanya replied, "Already sent. Paul's in motion. Sandra and David notified." "Thank you," Gabrielle said, then lowered her phone and looked back at Lance. "You now have less than 10 minutes to decide how this ends." Lance didn't back down. "You trying to scare us with fake calls and corporate buzzwords? That ain't gonna work here." Chloe nodded beside him. "You're not even dressed like someone who knows what corporate oversight means." Gabriel said nothing, but another customer did. A Latina woman in her 30s, holding the hand of a little girl around 6 years old, spoke. 2 weeks ago I came here, asked about the ghost. Ms. Sparks told me, and I quote, "This might be a bit above your range." Before I said a word, the room froze for a beat. Chloe turned. "That's not true." The woman replied, "It is. And you humiliated me in front of my child." For the first time, Chloe didn't respond. She just stood there, her face slowly paling. Lance attempted to redirect. "Let's stay focused on today's," but Ben cut him off. "No, let's not. Let's talk about how you treat people who don't match your sales filter." Kyle stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. She walked in here like she owns the place." Gabrielle turned and looked him dead in the eye. Her gaze hit like stone. "That's because I do." A few audible gasps rippled across the showroom. Chloe laughed awkwardly. "Oh, come on, this is sad now." Kyle sneered. "She's still pretending." "Someone call central casting." But Layla Torres didn't laugh. She looked at Gabrielle, at how people were beginning to gather around her, how each silent gaze shifted from dismissal to awareness, from indifference to curiosity, and from curiosity to support. She knew, even without an official confirmation, she knew. This woman was not like anyone else who had ever walked in here. No entourage, no name badge, no theatrics, just standing there and letting everyone witness it for themselves. Outside, a glossy black SUV rolled slowly into the front lot. 3 people stepped out, an Asian man in a deep navy suit, a Korean woman with glasses, and a brown-skinned man with a navy blue tie. They didn't speak. They walked straight toward the front entrance of Orion Prestige Motors. Inside, judgment was about to begin, and this time, no one could walk away without facing the truth. The glass doors of the showroom hadn't even opened to welcome the incoming oversight team, when the situation inside had already passed the threshold of what any company daring to call itself world-class could endure. And what blew it all up wasn't violence. It wasn't a physical altercation. It was a microphone, and a terrible decision. Lance Merritt was starting to feel uneasy. The atmosphere was no longer under his usual control. Customers' conversations had become disjointed. Their eyes lingered more on Gabrielle than the cars. Their gazes weren't indifferent anymore. Some had begun raising their phones. Ben Kessler was still live streaming. A short clip had already been shared on X, formerly Twitter, captioned, "CEO or not, this is how they treat black women at Orion Motors." That post lit the match, but Lance didn't know it yet. Chloe Sparks stood near the reception counter, her eyes darting between the customers and Gabrielle. Her worry was barely masked by a thin layer of haughtiness. And just as the mood began to shift, when a retreat and a quiet correction would have changed everything, Chloe did the opposite. She turned quickly toward the reception desk, reached for the showroom's internal microphone, a device meant only for emergencies like fires, lost children, or store closures. The sound rang through the speakers, sharp, unmistakable, and irreversible. "Attention staff, we have a situation at the front. A woman is impersonating corporate leadership. Please disregard any claims of authority made by this individual." Everything froze. Whispered conversations halted. A customer gasped, "Did she just—" Another shook their head. "No way." Gabrielle didn't move. Not a twitch. Only her eyes changed, like the surface of a lake split by a thin blade. She stared at Chloe. Not with fury, not with outrage, but with a steady, dissecting gaze as if etching every line of Chloe's face into memory. No rebuttal, no loss of composure. But everyone could feel it. This was no longer a quiet test. It had become a public reckoning. Chloe didn't return to the mic. Maybe even she realized she had made a fatal mistake. Kyle Danner looked around, color draining from his face. Lance Merritt stepped closer, his voice low, but not low enough to hide the panic. "Let's just de-escalate. We can talk this through." Gabrielle finally spoke, her tone low, steady, unshaken. "You could have asked for an ID. You could have called corporate. Instead, you used a microphone meant for safety, to humiliate someone you assumed had no power." She turned toward the scattered customers. "Let's be clear. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't break any rules. But I broke their expectation. That's what made me dangerous. A black woman near the Spectra display whispered to her friend, "She didn't even do anything, just stood there." A white man in a black suit muttered, "And they panicked." Ben Kessler now zoomed in on the name badge clipped to Gabriel's shirt. "That badge," he said on the live stream, "it looks legit. Black, metallic, has the Orion logo and title etched on it. You think she's lying?" A commenter chimed in immediately. "Already checked the website. Gabrielle Hawkins, Chief Executive Officer of Orion Prestige Group. She's real." Inside the showroom, Chloe began to step back. But Gabrielle didn't let up. She pulled the metallic badge from her pocket, held it up, not toward Chloe, but toward the customers. "This," she said, "is not a prop. It's a position I earned, but clearly not one I was ever expected to hold." A customer, male, South Asian, took out his phone, snapped a photo of the badge, nodded. "It matches. That's her." Kyle opened his mouth to object, but Layla Torres stepped out from behind the catalog desk, voice trembling but clear. "I looked her up my first day. I remember thinking, finally a woman of color running a luxury auto group." She turned to Gabrielle, eyes wide. "Thank you for walking in here today. I didn't know how to say something until now." Gabrielle nodded gently, her expression softening for just a moment. But the confrontation was far from over. Lance forced a laugh, trying to regain control. "Okay, okay. So maybe you are who you say you are. But why show up like this? Why not announce yourself properly?" Gabrielle tilted her head. "Because I shouldn't have to announce my value to be treated with basic respect." Chloe took another step back, her face pale. Kyle gritted his teeth. "You can't just show up undercover and expect us to roll out a red carpet." Gabrielle didn't miss a beat. "I expected professionalism, not red carpet, just dignity." An elderly white man in a cowboy hat nodded. "She's right. You don't treat people like this unless you think they don't matter." Ben swung the camera toward Lance's face, asking, "Still want to act like she doesn't belong?" Lance swallowed hard. Chloe muttered, "We didn't know. You can't blame us for not knowing." Gabriel turned sharply. "But you did know. The moment you saw me, you decided I wasn't worth your time. You chose not to know. And that's when the dam broke." A brown-skinned woman, silent until now, spoke up. "2 months ago, I asked about the hybrid model. Got told it wasn't available for demo. The next guy walked in and test drove it 5 minutes later." The man with her nodded in confirmation. The entire showroom began to erupt, not in shouting but in exposure. The fragments of silence peeled away. Chloe stood frozen. Kyle had nothing left to mock. Lance only murmured, "This is going too far." But Layla said, "No, sir. It's gone far for too long. Today it's just visible." Gabriel turned to her. "What's your last name again?" "Torres," she replied. "Ms. Torres," Gabriel said, her voice lower now but resonating across the hall. "You stood up when others stayed silent. Remember this moment, because that's what leadership actually looks like." And then, the front glass doors of the showroom opened. 3 individuals entered. Paul Ewan, Orion Prestige's regional director, tall with laser-focused eyes. Beside him, Sandra Cho, a board member, and David Patel, head of strategic development. They didn't say a word. They looked directly at Gabriel. Paul nodded. "Ma'am." Gabriel replied, "You're just in time." The Orion Motors showroom in Scottsdale, once touted as a beacon of luxury customer service, had just become ground zero for a cultural reckoning, and it all began with a microphone. When the showroom doors closed behind Paul Ewan, Sandra Cho, and David Patel, it was as if all sound had been sucked into a vacuum. No one spoke. No one moved. Everyone knew. This moment was no longer about 1 customer and 3 employees. This was a silent trial, a test of collective ethics, a deposition in broad daylight. Paul didn't need to ask a thing. His eyes scanned the room. Empty consultation tables, customers standing in rows, staff shrinking inward like they'd been caught at a crime scene. He gave Gabrielle Hawkins a slight nod. She returned it with a look as steady and forged as tempered steel. Sandra Cho pulled a slim tablet from her bag and connected to the internal system. David Patel opened his phone, checking the stream of documentation already forwarded by Tanya Brooks, Gabrielle's executive assistant. A few feet away, Chloe Sparks tried to stand upright, lips pressed tight, pale. Lance Merritt cleared his throat, about to speak, but Paul beat him to it. "We've reviewed the live log. We've seen the footage. We're not here to ask for explanations. We're here to observe responses." That sentence was both verdict and opportunity. Chloe couldn't utter a word. Kyle Danner, now nearly behind the operations desk, avoided every lens now pointed his way. Ben Kessler, still live streaming, whispered, "You're watching accountability unfold in real time. If this doesn't go viral, nothing should." But what stunned everyone didn't come from Gabriel or Paul or any member of upper management. It came from a customer. The Latina woman, the one Chloe had dismissed 2 weeks earlier, stepped forward, daughter in hand, turning to the crowd. "I wasn't going to say anything, but seeing her stand there and seeing them lie about her, I can't stay silent." She looked directly at Gabriel. "You didn't deserve what they did to you today. Neither did I, or my daughter." The little girl tightened her grip on her mother's hand. Customers nearby bowed their heads. The emotion began to swell. It wasn't about personal anger anymore. It had become collective memory. A black man raised his hand. "Last November, I walked in asking about financing. Got brushed off in under 3 minutes. A white woman in a red blazer added, "I brought my assistant, who's black, to ask about an Escalade. They asked if she was taking notes for someone. I didn't think much of it back then. Now I can't unsee it." Gabriel didn't say a word. Each story was a hammer strike, and every strike came down on the wall this system had built, masking discrimination under the polished veneer of target demographics. But then, something no one expected happened. A customer, young, South Asian, around 30, stepped forward and stood beside Gabriel. He said nothing, just stood, like a marker. Then another, a white man in a checkered shirt, moved to her other side, arms crossed. Then an elderly Asian woman with a cane. Then a Middle Eastern woman. Then a gay couple. No one shouted, no one protested. They just stood around Gabriel in a crescent formation, like a human wall, like a message too powerful for words. She will not stand alone. Chloe swallowed hard. Lance stepped back. Paul looked over at Sandra. She nodded, typing on the tablet. Stage 1, customer alignment observed. Unprompted, David Patel peered over his glasses. "The showroom is forming a human buffer," he said quietly. "Organic, uninstructed, symbolic." Layla Torres, still by the catalog stand, watched the shift unfold like magic. This was no longer just a place she interned at. It was the place she had just learned her first and greatest lesson about belief, resistance, and truth. Lance tried to stammer. We have policies. Guidelines. We didn't mean..." Gabrielle turned toward him, her voice no longer cold but sharp as a freshly honed blade. "You meant every choice you made. No one forced you to ignore me. No one made you mock my shoes or my presence. You chose that." Paul stepped forward. "Mr. Merritt, we will be reviewing all your client interactions over the last 24 months, including the complaints you dismissed." Chloe whispered, "We didn't know she was the CEO." A female customer recording on her phone replied, "And that's your defense? That if she wasn't, treating her like that would be fine?" The sound of Sandra Cho's fingers tapping on the tablet continued, steady and deliberate. Kyle shrank back further, shoulders nearly touching the wall. Gabrielle turned, facing the human wall around her. She didn't smile. She didn't thank them. She just stood taller, as if the weight of every dismissed voice had now settled on her shoulders. But she didn't bend. Paul turned to face the entire showroom staff, his eyes molten steel. "This ends today. The days of coded behavior, invisible hierarchies, and customer filtration based on appearance, they're over." Layla Torres stepped forward, slowly but firmly. She joined the wall. Ben Kessler panned the camera to her and said, "That's Layla." She spoke up first. An older man in the wall nodded. "She gave us the cue." Gabrielle looked at Layla. She gave her a soft nod. No words, but her eyes said everything. A recognition, a trust, a message. You're not alone. Lance couldn't hide the panic anymore. You people are turning this into a circus. A customer shot back instantly. No, you already did. We just turned on the lights. The entire showroom pulsed with silent agreement. No banners, no chants. The wall had formed, not to block anyone, but to declare what had long gone unspoken. Silence is no longer an option. And this time, when power showed up, it didn't come with a roar. It came by standing still, at the right place, at the right time, on the right side. The wall of people still stood, unmoving, unshifting, but the pressure it created had already begun to fracture something Lance Merritt once believed untouchable: control. For nearly a decade managing the Orion Motors showroom in Scottsdale, he had mastered the art of silent authority, not by shouting, but by signaling. A glance was enough to let staff know who the real customers were. A nod was the cue to ignore a casually dressed black visitor. A smirk served as silent confirmation. For him, control wasn't about giving orders. It was about making people believe orders weren't needed. But today, the in-store mic he once used to play ambient brand music had become evidence. The internal footage once tucked away was now being mirrored to corporate HQ. And right in front of him, the woman he once dismissed as standing in the wrong place was now surrounded by a human wall, every skin tone and background represented. For the first time in nearly an hour, he didn't know what to say next. Gabrielle Hawkins stood at the center, issuing no orders. Yet her silence was the loudest sound in the room. Paul Ewan held up his phone, took a 20-second call, then ended it. He looked to Gabrielle. Internal audit is watching live. Gabrielle nodded slightly, her eyes locked on Lance. Sandra Cho continued scanning the customer complaint history on her tablet, tapping red flags repeatedly. David Patel was reviewing security footage AI had filtered by keywords. Denied. Look. Back later. We don't have that model. Every click pulled another thread. Chloe Sparks now sat at the information desk, face pale. Kyle Danner was inching toward the garage exit, but Layla Torres saw it first. He's leaving, she said softly. Gabrielle turned toward Kyle. Stay, she said, voice low, sharp as shattered glass. Kyle froze, facing away. Gabrielle continued. You were very vocal earlier. Don't go quiet now. Several customers in the human wall raised their phones again. Ben Kessler said into his stream, They're trying to disappear. Not happening. Lance suddenly snapped, trying to reclaim his familiar stance. This is still my floor. I'm responsible here. I should have been informed of any executive visits. Gabrielle turned to him, gaze unbroken. And what would you have done? Polished the floor harder? Told your staff to fake kindness for 30 minutes? Lance stammered. At least we could have made a better impression. A South Asian male customer, standing on the left, interjected. So you admit you treat people differently when you're being watched? Lance turned. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said, the customer fired back. Sandra Cho tapped firmly on her tablet. We have enough for immediate disciplinary action. David Patel added, but we want to see who still thinks they can win this by pretending nothing happened. Chloe whispered, we were just doing what we thought was standard. Gabrielle took a single step forward, her tone never rising. And that standard is the problem. She pulled out her phone, opened the internal system dashboard, entered a dual authentication code, and spoke loud enough for every employee to hear. Tanya, lock Merritt, Sparks, and Danner out of all local access systems. Effective immediately. Confirmed, Tanya replied within 1.3 seconds. Chloe shot up from her chair. You're not serious. Deadly, Gabrielle replied. Lance stepped forward, voice tense. You don't get to make unilateral decisions here. Paul Ewan cut in. She does. And so do we. And you just lost the right to say, here. Kyle opened his mouth to object, but a voice from behind shut him down completely. A middle-aged black woman, wearing a purple blouse, standing next to the Phantom, said clearly and slowly, 2 months ago, he told me to come back with my husband because some decisions aren't made alone. Kyle turned toward her, frozen. She continued, My credit score is 810. I own 2 properties. But he looked at my hair and assumed I needed approval. Paul looked at David. David nodded. Flag it, Paul said. Already done, Sandra replied. No one was talking about cars anymore. No one was asking about engines or trim levels. Customers were recounting what had been buried, and each voice was a puzzle piece in the larger picture Gabriel had been quietly assembling for the past 6 months. Layla Torres stepped forward, her voice rising for the first time. In my first week, I saw 2 women being ignored. One was told to wait until a proper salesperson was free. But a man walked in 5 minutes later and got champagne. Gabrielle looked at her. Why didn't you speak then? Layla answered, because I thought that's how it worked. Until today. Gabrielle turned to the surrounding customers. How many of you have stories like these? More than 10 hands went up. Paul turned to Sandra. We've got a culture rot. Sandra replied, we've got a cleansing to do. Gabrielle spoke again, her voice still calm, but every word landing like iron. This is no longer a showroom. This is an echo chamber. Everything you thought would never surface is now visible, audible, and irreversible. Kyle tried to leave again. Gabriel turned to him. Kyle Danner, you mocked customers, dismissed questions, assumed you were above reproach. I didn't know, Kyle mumbled. Exactly, Gabriel said. That's the problem. You never cared enough to find out. Chloe whispered, I was told not to waste time on certain profiles. Gabrielle met her eyes. And you obeyed without question? That's not just complicity, that's participation. Ben Kessler ended his live stream. He looked around, then back at Gabrielle, as if something deeper had clicked. They didn't lose control because they were outnumbered. They lost it the moment someone they couldn't control didn't flinch. And just then, a soft chime rang from the showroom's notification system. A message from corporate headquarters. The formal investigation had begun. The 3 employees' access credentials were deactivated. A memo had been sent to every regional branch across the Southwest. Title, Escalated Incident, Scottsdale Flagship, Immediate Oversight Required. Lance Merritt looked at Gabriel, then at Paul, as if still searching for a way out. But the door had closed, and the first crack hadn't just formed, it had triggered a collapse. The collapse of something they once called silent control. And this time, control had returned to the hands of the one who truly earned it. No one gave the order. No one asked. But somehow, almost instinctively, the customers inside the showroom began to move. Each step was deliberate, calm. No chaos, no pushing. One person rose from a waiting chair and walked toward Gabriel. Then another. Then another. Each with a different look. One in a tailored suit, one in a faded t-shirt, another in worn-out shoes. No one wore a badge. No one stated a title, but they all carried the same thing, a long, suppressed, quietly burning indignation that had been waiting for release. In less than a minute, more than a dozen people had formed a crescent around Gabrielle Hawkins. They didn't touch her. They didn't shield her. They simply stood, present, unwavering, like a living wall, the human shield, a formation not summoned by protest, but forged by the collective realization that if they didn't stand today, they wouldn't be able to look their children in the eye tomorrow. Lance Merritt looked at the scene before him, confused, shaken, and took a step back. This was no longer a showroom. This was a courtroom without a judge, a trial with no jury. Every phone raised was a witness. Every pair of eyes watching was an indictment. Chloe Sparks stood near the reception counter, lips trembling. Her hand clutched her phone, but she didn't dare turn the camera on. Kyle Danner, by the garage entrance, scanned the room like he was searching for an exit. But now every door had become a mirror, reflecting their own behavior right back at them. Gabrielle didn't need to say anything more. She slowly turned, letting her gaze pass over each person in the circle surrounding her. No words of thanks, no rallying cry. Their presence was the answer to a question America had avoided for far too long. Who will stand when injustice doesn't call your name? Layla Torres, the intern once told to stay quiet, stood just behind Gabriel, back straight, fists clenched, chin high. For her, this wasn't an internship anymore. It was a vow. Paul Ewan stepped forward, phone in hand, and whispered, Tanya, Capture all live security signals. Activate the blind spot cameras. The voice replied, already done. Sandra Cho moved beside Paul, pointing at her tablet. Someone just tried accessing the system from a locked internal IP. David Patel glanced over. Could be Kyle. Paul nodded and turned. Mr. Danner, please stay where you are. Any further actions will be treated as system tampering. Kyle looked like he was about to argue, but every eye in the showroom turned toward him, silencing the words in his throat. A young black customer, in a gray hoodie with tattoos down his arm, walked toward Gabriel. He didn't say anything. He simply stood beside Layla, nodded, crossed his arms. A Korean woman with silver hair and an ivory handbox stood on Gabriel's right, eyes forward. A white man, roughly 60, in jeans and a checkered shirt, stepped to the left. In less than 3 minutes, more than 20 people stood in a firm, expanding circle around Gabriel. No one shouted, no one protested, but no one left. Lance tried to reclaim his authority, raising his voice. This is becoming disruptive. You're interfering with operations. Gabriel turned to him, voice cold. You had an hour to operate. You used it to humiliate, not to help. Chloe snapped, her voice brittle and spiraling. You can't just take over like this. This isn't some protest, it's a car dealership. A customer, Middle Eastern, calm, replied, no, it's a reckoning. A black woman in a purple blazer added, and we're tired of pretending this is normal. Ben Kessler raised his phone again. If you're watching this and wondering why people aren't leaving, it's because when justice walks into the room, no one should walk out. Layla turned to Paul, steady. Sir, she deserves to be heard. All of them do. Paul nodded. And they will. Gabriel stepped forward, standing before Lance. Though not touching him, she looked at him, not with fury, but with pity. You never expected someone like me to walk in here. You thought I was a fluke, a joke. But what you failed to understand is, people like me don't need to raise our voice to raise a movement. She pointed softly behind her. This is what accountability looks like. Lance opened his mouth to respond, but no one was listening anymore. A woman carrying a baby stepped into the circle. A college student in an ASU hoodie followed. An elderly Irish man with a cane made his way slowly to the left side. And so the circle kept growing. No one called for it. No hashtags required. Just a story that sounded too much like their own. Sandra Cho looked at David Patel and whispered, we're not just watching a personnel crisis. We're watching a culture collapse. David nodded. And a new one rising, right in front of it. Gabrielle took a deep breath and spoke into her phone. Status. Tanya replied, blind spot cam recorded evidence of record tampering. One of the 3 locked accounts tried to delete previous complaints. Gabrielle stared at Lance. You didn't just discriminate. You tried to erase the proof of it. Lance shook his head, voice cracking. No, I was following internal pressure. Targets, ratios. Gabriel cut him off. You followed fear, not values. Ben Kessler lowered his phone and looked at the room. This moment, it's not just hers anymore. It's all of ours. No one disagreed. No one left. And then, from within the circle, something unexpected happened. A middle-aged white man at the far edge spoke up. My daughter came here last month, wanted to look at a hybrid, left in tears because someone said, we don't do test drives for students. He looked directly at Chloe. It was you. Chloe stepped back, nearly stumbling. Gabrielle didn't need to say a word. She didn't need to accuse. The people who had once been silent were now speaking. For her, one by one, loud and clear. The human shield wasn't built to protect her from being thrown out of the showroom. It was built to protect the truth from being buried again. And this time, no manager had the power to dismiss them. No employee had the influence to remove them. Because if they left, this entire system would have nothing left worth staying for. The showroom's glass doors opened once more. Not for a walk-in customer, nor for a staff member clocking out. This time the footsteps echoed, measured, firm, unhurried, but unmistakably purposeful. 3 men and 1 woman entered, all wearing Orion Motors corporate ID badges clipped to their jackets. Tailored suits pristine. No need for introductions. No need to knock. Their arrival, though the room was already packed, added another weight of silence to the air. Gabrielle Hawkins turned around. Her expression showed no surprise. No worry. She had been expecting this. Paul Ewan leaned toward her. "They're early," Gabrielle replied. "No, they're exactly on time." Leading the group was Vincent Elridge, Senior Vice President of Orion Motors for North America. Beside him stood Margot Ellis, Regional Director of Human Resources, flanked by two internal investigation officers. Vincent walked to the center of the showroom, taking in the full scene. Customers forming a human circle, employees standing off to the side, eyes shifting somewhere between hope and dread. He didn't smile. He didn't greet. He simply asked one question. "Where's Merritt?" Lance Merritt was less than 6 paces away, but said nothing. Paul responded, "He's here." Vincent nodded slightly and turned his gaze to Gabrielle. "And you're Hawkins?" Gabrielle answered plainly, "Yes." Another nod. Then Vincent looked toward the crowd. "And all of this?" Gabrielle didn't explain at length. "Testimony of everything your regional managers didn't want to see." Vincent motioned to one of the investigators. The officer pulled out a handheld scanner, sweeping through cameras, mics, and active data systems. Margot Ellis stepped forward, holding a tablet. "I'll need two-factor authorization for 6 months of interaction history." Gabrielle nodded. "Already secured. Authorized by the Office of the President this morning." Kyle Danner swallowed hard, stepping back once more. Chloe Sparks looked around as if searching for help, but all she met were blank stares from her colleagues. Lance stepped forward, his first real attempt at reclaiming relevance since noon. "I can explain the discrepancies. Some incidents were taken out of context. Others were—" Vincent raised a hand, cutting him off, eyes never leaving him. "Save it for the audit team. You're on immediate administrative leave." The words weren't loud, but they struck like a sentence. Lance's eyes widened. "Without a hearing?" Vincent answered, "You just had one." "Look around." Chloe's panic flared. "Wait, you can't punish everyone. I was just—" Margot cut in sharply. "Quiet compliance isn't innocence. You executed decisions. You carried tone. You filtered customers." Vincent turned to Paul and Gabrielle. "What's your assessment so far?" Paul didn't hesitate. "Rotten at the roots. Culture of selective service, implicit bias, and retaliation against dissent." Gabrielle added, "And a belief that no one's watching unless a suit walks in." Margot slid her finger along the tablet, scrolling a long list. 57 customer complaints in 8 months, 46 unaddressed, 11 deleted from the system. She looked at Gabrielle. "We've known who you are since last month, but we wanted to see how they'd handle the truth." Gabrielle nodded without surprise. "That's why I didn't intervene earlier." Layla Torres, standing behind, finally spoke in a voice taut with tension. "She didn't need to. We all saw enough to know who we were dealing with." Margot turned to her and nodded. "And we saw enough to know who's worth keeping." Vincent gave a signal. One of the investigators walked to the reception area, removed Chloe's nameplate, disabled the fingerprint scanner, and revoked her internal access credentials. A corporate IT rep arrived moments later and began sweeping the local data servers. Chloe trembled. "Please, I didn't think it would go this far." Margot answered coolly, "That's what everyone says, until it does." Kyle reached for his phone, but internal security had already stepped beside him. Gabrielle didn't look. She didn't need to. She had written this exact protocol. The human wall remained, less because they didn't understand what was happening, and more because they wanted to witness something they'd never seen before. Real change, from the very top. Ben Kessler restarted his live stream. "Corporate's here. The reckoning has arrived, and they're not just nodding politely." A black man in a FedEx uniform stepped forward, facing Vincent. "I didn't know who she was when she walked in, but after standing here for 30 minutes, I know exactly who's who." Vincent didn't reply. He just nodded. People who understood didn't need many words. Gabrielle turned, now face to face with Lance Merritt for the final time. "Your mistake wasn't failing to recognize me. It was failing to recognize the people you dismissed every single day." Lance opened his mouth, but no words came out. Gabriel continued, I'm not here to punish, I'm here to rebuild. But that starts with removal. Vincent nodded. Then let's begin. He turned to the circle of people around them. For those of you who stood up today, who spoke, who stayed, we're listening, and we're about to ensure that no one in any Orion showroom ever has to experience this again. Margot Ellis stepped forward, handing Gabriel a sealed folder marked confidential. You'll be interim general manager until further notice. Gabriel showed no emotion. She accepted the file as one accepts responsibility. Nothing more, nothing less. Layla Torres's eyes widened. Wait, you're staying? Gabriel nodded. Someone has to clean the glass before others can see through it. David Patel whispered to Sandra Cho. We just watched a system unravel and a leader rise. Paul Ewan added, and not because she shouted, but because she never had to. The human wall began to loosen, not because they gave up, but because they knew they didn't need to hold the line anymore. Phones came down, hands reached for shoulders. They turned to Gabriel, not speaking, but smiling. And that smile was a kind of acknowledgement she had never received before. Not for her title, but for her truth. And this time, truth didn't arrive on a nameplate or an access badge. It arrived through the way a black woman, without a uniform, without declared power, made an entire system stop. And listen, for the first time in the history of Orion Motors Scottsdale, a memo from headquarters ended with 3 words never used before. They are watching. When the door to the general manager's office closed behind Gabriel, the remaining space inside the showroom sank into a silence of a different kind. Not the brittle tension of earlier, but the hush that follows a storm. People had stood. They had spoken. They had witnessed accountability strike down names once considered untouchable. And yet they hadn't left. Deep down they knew what happened today wasn't just an internal investigation. It was the burial of a belief system and the birth of something still undefined. Gabriel stood by the glass facade, arms folded, watching the parking lot that now lacked the usual array of luxury vehicles, parked with entitled arrogance. Instead, it was dotted with delivery vans, compact cars, everyday transportation, vehicles that felt real. The space behind her remained full, but no longer frantic. Paul Ewan sat with Margot Ellis, reviewing system logs, rejected sales orders, customer interaction histories, and internal personnel notes. Every line of code was an exposure, every data entry, a charge sheet, but that was only the tip of the iceberg. What stirred beneath the surface now was a quiet tectonic shift. Kyle Danner, once strutting around like a self-appointed vice president, now sat in the staff lounge, fingers trembling slightly as he held a cup of water, eyes avoiding everyone. Chloe Sparks had been escorted out nearly an hour earlier, yet her words still hung faintly in the air, defensive echoes from a performance whose script had long expired. Lance Merritt remained in the glass office, flanked by 2 investigators. No more declarations, no more managerial bravado, just the deflation of a man laid bare after years of living inside the illusion of invincibility. Then something unexpected happened, not from corporate, not from upper management, but from those who had been the quietest of all, the maintenance staff. A man named Josh, a white technician with uneven stubble, stood up and walked toward Gabriel. Ms. Hawkins? She turned. Yes? I think I need to tell you something about what happened last year. Gabriel nodded, not pressing. Josh swallowed hard, then said, Do you remember the case with Mr. Mitchell, the customer who was denied warranty service because of insufficient purchase history? Gabriel nodded. I was the one inspecting the system that day. I saw his request was flagged as invalid, not because of missing data, but because someone had manually noted, not an Orion priority customer. Paul overheard and turned. Are you sure? Josh nodded. I thought about printing it out for proof, but at the time, I was scared. Gabriel said gently, You weren't the only one. Then, like a quiet domino effect, others began to step forward. A woman named Marlene from inventory spoke up. I was once told to shorten delivery times for customers who didn't dress upscale. I thought it was an operational directive. Now I realize It was a filter. Another, a former intern from the local college, said, "They warned me not to be too friendly with Latino customers, said it would dilute the showroom's brand." Each confession was a crack in the old regime's foundation. Each statement, however soft, was a blade against the edifice of prejudice that had existed not through policy, but through practiced silence. Gabrielle didn't interrupt. She listened, and the more she listened, the more people stood. David Patel, a technical staffer of Indian descent, stepped forward. "I was removed from the rotation for the San Diego branch, even though I had the highest technical score that month. The manager said my name didn't fit that market." A woman named Jennifer, white, red-haired, who had left and recently returned, delivered a line that left the room breathless. "I once heard Lance refer to a group of customers as those Section 8 shoppers, just because they were from a zip code near subsidized housing." Vincent and Margot stepped out of the glass office, scanning the room that had now transformed into something far more intimate than a workplace. Margot said quietly to Gabrielle, "This isn't a store anymore. This is a courtroom." Gabrielle replied, "No, it's a truth chamber. And they've been waiting years to breathe." Margot looked at her, then nodded. "Let them." Gabrielle turned back to the crowd. "If there's something you haven't said, now is the time." And as if released from an unspoken gag order, voices began cascading, from warehouse staff to baristas, technicians to car washers, all of them contributing brushstrokes to a painting no one had ever wanted displayed. A culture where bias was normalized, where service was calibrated to appearance, voice, and zip code. Malik, the only black employee in logistics, shared how he was asked to swap his name badge because Malik sounded too South Bronx. An Asian American intern said she was asked to go by Emily instead of Ji Hyun, so customers would find it easier to pronounce. Gabrielle looked at them all, not with pity or rage, but with deep regard. Those who once bowed their heads were now lifting them, not to threaten, but to be seen. And strangely, no one cried. The pain had been there too long. It had calloused. What they needed wasn't sympathy, it was restoration. Margot jotted notes. Paul recorded quietly for documentation. But Vincent remained still. He didn't need to record. He had once signed off on customer filtering strategies, brand segmentation plans. And now he stood face to face with the final product of those spreadsheets, a generation of employees afraid of their own presence. Gabrielle turned toward Vincent. She didn't speak, but the question in her eyes was clear. Vincent understood. He nodded, then said, "We were wrong. We built a ladder without noticing who was forced to stand beneath it." Gabrielle asked, "What will you do now?" For the first time, Vincent didn't speak from the mountaintop of leadership. He spoke like a man relearning. "We'll burn the ladder." It wasn't poetic metaphor. It was a directive that would reshape not just the Scottsdale branch, but the entire way Orion Motors saw itself. And in a rare moment, this gleaming, high-gloss showroom transformed into a place of restoration. Not for product, but for people. Gabrielle made no speech. She simply looked at them, each one, not with inquiry or judgment, but recognition. And for many of them, it was the first time they had ever felt someone truly listening. The atmosphere inside the Scottsdale showroom had completely changed. After the waves of confessions, testimonies, and whistleblowing from employees across departments, Gabrielle Hawkins was no longer confronting a handful of bad actors. What she now faced was an entire ecosystem, a system of quiet, systemic injustice disguised beneath seemingly benign workflows and corporate jargon. She left the guest lounge, not in a rush, not in panic, carrying only a thick stack of printed reports and a hard drive Paul Ewan had just extracted from the showroom's CRM database. She knew exactly where she needed to go, the data sublevel, the room beneath the showroom's glittering surface, where system logs, internal emails, hiring reports, and rarely audited back-end files lived. Too boring for boardrooms, but powerful enough to destroy or redeem an entire institution. Walking beside her was Vincent Lin, no longer looking like a chairman, but more like a witness headed to a tribunal. When the cold steel door opened into the data room, Gabrielle didn't have to say a word. Vincent already understood. It was here that Orion Motors' story would either be rewritten or shut down for good. Paul had encrypted the extracted files so that only Gabrielle could access them. What she now held was a digital vault, emails from regional offices flagging undesirable customers based on names, zip codes, or even the model of their previous car. Excel sheets with something called brand positive customer ratio, a horrifyingly corporate phrase masking systemic discrimination, and most disturbing of all, a file labeled Project Cinder. Gabrielle opened it. The screen lit up with the Orion Motors logo and a header. Internal use only, strategic visibility filtering pilot, Scottsdale plus 3 sites. The document outlined a trial program across 4 dealerships designed to filter incoming customers based on brand alignment scores using a combination of AI behavioral analytics and appearance-based behavior scoring. It read like a pitch deck for a tech startup, but its substance was something darker, the automation of bias. Gabrielle scrolled to the bottom. There, in clean corporate signature blocks, were 2 names, Lance Merritt, Vincent Lin. She turned to Vincent. Did you know they were using it like this? Vincent was quiet. No, he said. I approved a pilot to study consumer behavior based on historical purchase patterns, not to judge people by how they look. Gabrielle said nothing. She kept scrolling. On page 4, she stopped. The system's rapid identification keywords appeared. Ball cap low, urban shirt, nonverbal shopping, low credit suspicion, suspicious footwear. Gabrielle whispered aloud, suspicious footwear? Vincent lowered his head. That's what they called worn shoes that didn't match the rest of the outfit. Gabrielle closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, as if shedding a former part of herself to make space for a decision she could never walk back. We need to convene an emergency ethics council. Today. Vincent nodded. Both internal and external, civil rights attorneys, scholars, community reps. No more one-sided conversations. Gabrielle stood upright. I'll coordinate it, but you're opening the meeting. Vincent looked stunned. Me? Yes, you signed off on Project Cinder. You say the first word. That afternoon, in a modest meeting room behind the showroom, usually reserved for corporate training, nearly 40 people gathered. Representatives from Phoenix Equality Now, 2 ethics professors from the University of Arizona, 3 independent civil rights attorneys, and 12 Orion employees from other branches who had previously filed internal complaints. There were also former customers, individuals previously deemed off-brand without ever knowing they were being judged. Gabrielle stepped up. If you were ever treated with disrespect at one of our showrooms, it may not have been personal. It may have been a system, evaluating you before a human even learned your name. A hush fell over the room. Then came a sniffle. A black woman in her 60s raised her hand. I came here with my daughter when she graduated. I wanted to surprise her with a car. The salesman didn't greet us, just said nothing we'd be comfortable affording, though I never mentioned our budget. A Chinese-American man said, they asked if I needed a translator, even though I was speaking perfect English. Then they led me to the used cars when I said I came to see the new sedans. Vincent stepped up to the microphone. His gaze wasn't defensive. It was the look of a man finally walking the long road down from a tower he helped build. I take responsibility, not only because my name's on the approval, but because I trusted data without questioning its ethics. I believed that filtering would enhance the brand experience. I was wrong to believe technology could substitute human dignity. I was wrong for not asking the harder questions. He paused. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to ask for the right to make it right. No applause, but no one left. Gabrielle followed. As of today, all Orion showrooms will permanently disable behavior scoring AI. We will collaborate with civil rights organizations to rebuild our service models based on transparency. No appearance-based judgment, no silent filters, no hidden triggers in the system. She held up the new protocol binder. Every customer will have the right to know why they were denied service. Every employee will have the right to challenge unethical directives without fear of retaliation. Every showroom will have at least 2 independent ethics advisors conducting periodic reviews. Vincent added, and I will step down from executive leadership after the special audit. I'll return only when the community says we've earned that right. At that moment, the woman from earlier, Janine, stood and said, I don't want you to quit. I want you to redo this. Do it right this time. Gabriel nodded. That's the goal, not just to fix a company, but to rebuild its citizenship. The next morning, news outlets picked it up. Orion Motors admits using AI to filter customers by appearance. CEO apologizes. Civil rights groups applaud sweeping reform at Arizona dealership. But within some internal auto forums and executive chats, whispers surfaced, is this really necessary? All this just because a few people got offended? Gabrielle knew she wouldn't win over everyone, but she also knew that systemic rot didn't begin with one big bad decision. It started with 1,000 small ones, the ones that seemed understandable, reasonable, not worth arguing over. She wasn't afraid of massive change. What she feared was the phrase, it's just a minor thing, because that's how rot spreads, not with blood and spectacle, but with silence. She refused to let that silence grow, not at Orion, not anywhere. The atmosphere inside the Scottsdale showroom's assembly hall that day was no longer tense. Instead, there was a strange kind of awakening in the air, like that very first moment after a storm, when people begin to gather the scattered pieces and quietly ask themselves how to start again. Gabrielle Hawkins hadn't left Arizona. She temporarily relocated her office from Chicago to Scottsdale, making this place the headquarters for the deep, systemic reform of the entire Orion Motors network. Not because this was where the mistakes began, but because this was the first place where someone finally spoke the truth out loud. She started with the smallest things, name tags. Gone were titles like sales director, client ranking lead, or anything else that reflected corporate hierarchy. In their place were roles like customer advocate, experience advisor, and community liaison. For Gabrielle, language wasn't just symbolic, it was a map of culture. A showroom shouldn't be a place where customers walk in and are immediately slotted into invisible social tiers. It should be a space where every human being, whether wealthy or modest, feels like they are being heard without having to prove anything first. She ordered that all employee training materials be rewritten, not by corporate HR, but by the very people who had once been excluded from the system, frontline workers, customers who had been discriminated against, and those who had spoken out during the recent hearings. She called it the People's Curriculum, a living document, constantly updated by the community, never stamped and frozen by corporate headquarters. Gabrielle wasn't just overhauling personnel or procedures. She was reshaping the very structure of governance. She established an internal ethics council with authority equal to the executive board. By design, this council required at least 3 members from the local community where each showroom operated, one representative from a civil rights legal group, and one rotating low-level employee whose seat changed every 90 days. Those once deemed unqualified were now seated at the decision-making table. Every morning, Gabrielle hosted what she called a listening hour, not for reports, but to truly listen. Employees, customers, even people just walking past the showroom could come in and share a story, offer feedback, or simply speak. No appointments, no signups. The first session had only 2 attendees. By the second week, dozens showed up. By the fourth, the temporary office space could no longer hold them. Plastic chairs were set up on the parking lot, where a former car wash worker, who had once been denied a voice, stood up and told his story. He said, I never thought the things I saw would one day be written down and counted as truth. Gabrielle didn't hide her tears. To her, reform wasn't a 100-page document. Reform was when an invisible person was finally recognized as a witness. At corporate headquarters, several former executives began submitting their resignations. Some did it out of fear, some because they knew their era was over. But the most noteworthy came in the form of a handwritten letter from Brandon Kessler, former VP of Operations, and the very man who once issued the directive to turn away substandard customers. In the letter he wrote, I don't remember the exact moment I started slipping away from basic ethics, but I do remember laughing when one of my staff turned away, a woman because of her jacket. And by the time I realized that laugh was a silent kill shot, hundreds had been turned away, and no one had said a word. Gabrielle kept that letter private, not to destroy him, but to remind herself that the most dangerous systems don't scream to do harm. They simply require people to say nothing. 3 months into the overhaul, Gabriel unveiled a bold new initiative, Project Reverence, an 18-month plan to rebuild Orion's culture from the ground up, starting with the showrooms that had inflicted the deepest wounds. As part of the plan, each showroom would host a public reconciliation day, an open event where local community members could come share stories, speak directly with employees and managers, and engage in unfiltered dialogue. It wasn't about issuing formal apologies. It was about facing the truth, about understanding, learning, and changing. Scottsdale was the first to host the event. In the back lot, over 400 people attended, including an elderly woman who'd once been denied service for not having a membership code and a flower delivery driver who had been kicked off the property for wearing jeans. A young girl named Layla, who had once witnessed her mother being scolded for not looking like someone who could afford a car, was the final speaker. Layla stepped forward, holding a microphone, and spoke slowly. "My mom cried on the way home that day, but today she's sitting right over there, and she's smiling. Not because everything's perfect, but because for the first time, someone actually listened to her." Silence swept the space, then erupted into applause. Gabrielle stood in the back, off stage among the employees. She chose not to stand in the spotlight, but in the crowd, beside those who had once been silent, once afraid, but were now part of the healing. When the event ended, no one rushed to leave. People lingered, they talked, they hugged, they nodded at each other, as if finally they had seen a version of Orion that matched what they had always hoped it could be. Not just a corporation, but a place where things could begin again, with decency. 6 months after Gabrielle Hawkins officially announced the full-scale reform of Orion Motors, the company's Chicago headquarters hosted an event unlike anything in its corporate history, the Legacy Ceremony. Unlike past investor meetings or internal awards galas, this one had no grand stage, no electronic background music, and no reserved seats for executives. Instead, wooden chairs were arranged in a close circle, right in the middle of the company museum's exhibit floor, a place that had long neglected a portion of its history deemed not media-friendly enough. The first to speak were not C-level executives or marketing directors. They were two retired janitors, a former front desk staffer, and a woman who had once been denied service at a high-end Los Angeles showroom, simply for wearing flip-flops. Each came forward not to boast, but to share something that had been forgotten. Among them was Mr. Daniel McClellan, the former employee who had uncovered and reported discriminatory practices at the Dallas branch back in 2012, only to be forced into resignation. He was invited as the guardian of legacy. He didn't say much. He simply held up an old photograph, himself and a black customer service employee named Alicia, who had been removed from the company without explanation. He said, "I used to think this company would never remember her name, but today if you gave me one wish, I'd wish for my grandchildren to know there was once a woman named Alicia who taught us about kindness simply by being denied." After Daniel finished, the room fell utterly silent. No thunderous applause, just bowed heads and slow nods, as if something long buried was surfacing, breathing for the first time in years. Gabrielle sat in the unnamed row, wearing a simple white shirt, jotting down notes in a worn notebook. Not for editing, but for remembering. She understood legacy couldn't be built by PR campaigns. It had to be recognized through the very things that were once erased. After the ceremony, Gabrielle announced a new initiative, the Silent Names Initiative, a program to restore and honor those who had been erased, silenced, or hidden from the company's official story. From employees forced out for challenging the system, to customers dismissed for not fitting the brand, all would now be named, documented, and included in Orion Motors' historical record. The first list contained 27 names, including Alicia, the woman in Daniel's photo. A wooden plaque was placed in the main lobby of headquarters, engraved with each name. No flowers, no spotlight, just names, acknowledged publicly for the first time. Gabrielle stepped up to the plaque, placing her hand on one inscription. "Alicia Jordan. She doesn't need to be remembered for her silence. She needs to be remembered because she existed." A young employee named Marcus, standing behind her, whispered, I used to think the company didn't need to do this, but now I understand. If we don't acknowledge the part we tried to hide, then everything else is just pretending. 3 months after the legacy ceremony, Gabrielle announced her decision to step down as CEO of Orion Motors, but not to retire and not to join another corporation. She declared the launch of an independent nonprofit called the Reverence Trust, a national center dedicated to monitoring ethics and equity in corporate environments. The organization would provide tools, training, and even emergency intervention rights in companies where employees or customers were facing discrimination, voice suppression, or systemic erasure. During her farewell press conference, a reporter asked, "What would you say is your greatest legacy at Orion Motors?" Gabrielle smiled and answered, "Not me. The real legacy is sitting in the front row, those who were once forgotten, a seat they should have had a long time ago." On Orion Motors' new website, a section titled Founding Voices was launched, an open space where any employee could share stories, photos, memories, or feedback. The very first comment read, "I'm the son of Alicia Jordan. Thank you for finally saying her name." Below it were thousands of likes and replies, not from investors, but from people who had once believed they didn't deserve to trust in a fair system. Now they knew they were invisible no more. Get by. Perhaps the deepest wound isn't being rejected. It's being forgotten, being erased from a place you once belonged to. But today, those names have returned. Not on a stage, not under a spotlight, but in the hearts of those who were once told they didn't matter. If you've ever been judged by your appearance, if you've ever stayed silent while screaming inside, if you've ever felt like a shadow in the system, then this story was meant for you. We can't rewrite the past, but we can say to the future, "I saw, I heard, and I will no longer be silent." Tell us, how did this video make you feel? What part struck you the hardest? What moment made you want to stand up and do something different? If you believe in justice, if you believe that every person, no matter their position, deserves to be named, heard, and respected, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story. We're here to tell the truths the world tried to ignore. You are part of the change. Every share, comment, and subscription helps this story reach the people who need it most.